Hello, everyone. Welcome to Reclamation, a Be Emboldened initiative. I'm Naomi. I'm the founder and director here at BE. And Be Emboldened exists for those impacted by spiritual abuse. And we support others by providing support in the prevention of victimization as well as re-victimization, creating a safe place to ask hard questions to heal and to rebuild. And today we have one of our survivor stories. And the reason I asked this guest to come on and have this conversation with me is because she had an experience of a church and connection with an MLM. So multi-level marketing organization. And I've had some experience with MLMs in the past. I know a lot of people have had experiences with MLMs, and I've seen some other examples popping up of an MLM in conjunction with some kind of church service. So I thought this would be really interesting for people, hopefully have an aspect of prevention for anyone who tunes in, where there may be some things that we're going to be informed on that maybe we hadn't thought about before, as well as, of course, always anyone who has had a similar experience. I'm sure you're going to find connections with your story. So with that, Tami, welcome. I'm going to jump right into our first question. I'm going to ask, how would you describe the religious group that you were involved with?
Yeah, no, thank you, Naomi, for having me. It's an honor to be here. So I was introduced to a multi-level marketing organization first, and through a friend, and through that experience of joining that organization, that's what eventually led me to the church that was associated with the organization. And so that conversation went like they all do. Hey, I've got something I'd like to share with you. I think it might be helpful to you. And then, and that's what drew me in to what they were offering. And then it led me to going to the church that's associated with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and something I want to say really early on in this conversation for anyone out there who has been a part of an MLM or is right now, this conversation, the goal is not targeting MLMs. We're going to speak to when the two intersect, some of the like dual relationship type issues that can happen that could get in the way and can open the door maybe for spiritual abuse. So for anyone who's connected with an MLM and you're having a good experience, there's such a mix out there. There's a mix of opinions. There's a mix of experiences. And so that is definitely not a stand that I am taking, that Tami, I can tell you're taking, that Be Emboldened is taking. This is more about what happens when the two get overly involved with one another. What kinds of things do we want to watch out for? What can happen? What harms can be caused? So that's the goal of this conversation. So again, I want to give that disclaimer and that clarification right up front. So please, on YouTube, don't leave comments about we're attacking MLMs. We're not attacking MLMs. We're going to share a personal experience of what went wrong when it became, again, too interconnected with the church. So when you got involved then, Tami, with the MLM, were you attending a different church at the time?
I was.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so
what did that look like?
Yeah, so I was going through a divorce at the time, and I was attending a different church, the same church where I was going with my family. But I was introduced to this business through a friend, like I said, and I was attending a different church. And then I ended up meeting that went for a while. I was at the other church. I was pursuing the business and beginning to build it. And then through that first couple of years, I met and married my second husband. And so he had wanted to know what it meant to find a healthy church. And we went and talked to the pastor who was associated with the business, because we had met him and seen him at some of the meetings of the business and the seminars. And there was a church service on Sundays, and he was the one leading it. And it was about a 45-minute drive to go there. And he was very gracious and told us how to determine a healthy church when you're seeking. And when we left that meeting, he said, let's just come here. And I said, oh, okay. So that's what we ended up doing. So that's how we ended up being in the business and then at the church, was we just made a decision to switch churches.
Okay, so the pastor of the church you transitioned to was also involved in the MLM
Yes.
business.
So there was a very strong partnership between the leader of the MLM organization and the pastor that we had met through it. And a lot of the business leaders and members traveled long distances to come to this particular church.
Okay. When I think about MLMs and like the whole kind of upline thing, where was the pastor higher up, or a lot of these people a part of his
That's
team?
an excellent question. And it gets a little muddy, right? Because to your point, there's something called
Okay.
cross-lining in these organizations, and we're all on different teams with different hierarchy of leadership, and you just happen to be in the group of the person that invited you. So you don't have a choice of what group to be in. That's just how it works, because that's building their business to bring you in. And so I don't know where he was in the structure. He was building a business, the pastor was. He did have a team, but he was on a different team than I was, and with a different leadership. I would imagine directly to the leader of the organization, I assume. So there was cross-lining. So, it's a big, huge organization, but you're a part of a specific team silo, let's say, and then you're going to a church where there's people from different silos, different teams. And there was this sense of cross-lining was also applicable during a church service. So if there's a fellowship time where you're all gathered around having coffee, you're not really supposed to be talking to people who aren't on your team. So it was isolating in the terms of normal church fellowship, where you weren't free really to speak to whomever you would like. It was discouraged. Maybe not implicitly, but there was a nuance there where you could just sense that you weren't supposed to be speaking to one another.
What was the concern there?
Well, we were told the concern was that everybody runs their business a little bit differently, and something that's working for one team might necessarily work for your team. And I think it was just to kind of, it was a control measure to keep you from discussing with someone else and doing something differently than your upline was telling you to do. It was a measure of controlling the people to do what it was, because it was all about obeying the leaders, right? The leaders of the church, the leaders of the business, and it was submitting to their authority and modeling yourself after their behavior and their success or what have you. And to talk or to someone in a different team, that would put you on a different trajectory, perhaps. And so it was a measure of control is really how I would describe it now.
Okay, because I'm not familiar with people like hopping from one upline to another, but is that a thing? Could that have been a concern?
Well, yeah, that's not really
like poaching, basically.
I couldn't have changed. And in fact, I was meant to be mentored directly by the person, the upline to me. And I sometimes tried to go around, and there was always conflict and confusion when I would try to get input from someone higher on a mentorship level. So I did it, but it wasn't always well received. So, and then there were times when the organization shifted business people and merged businesses. So it could be done, but it wasn't driven by, I want to say, the day-to-day people. It was driven by people in power, if that makes sense. Have leadership decisions, administrators, people who had the authority to do that.
Well, and it seems like there could be these kind of intersections that might cause like crashes between the leadership of the church and then someone's upline. Were there ever issues where it's like, well, who am I listening to? Or was the business kept separate enough that when it came to church, you followed church leadership, and when it came to the MLM, you followed your upline?
Oh, it was very much blended, and there was no distinction between the two. It was an MLM church, and most people there were part of this organization. And so there were leaders and there were elders in the church that weren't in your upline, so you really didn't talk to them. They weren't ministering to you or shepherding you. It was all, maybe sometimes, but it mostly was. I mean, my children would play with the leader of the organization's children on occasion. There was a little bit of conversation with the mom to organize that. Very kind and friendly. But there wasn't really a relationship with folks from that nature. And so it was very much observed. The business model was very much observed in the church. And it was a leadership model. So it was a leadership model based on, if you work hard enough and follow these principles, you will be a successful leader and earn the money you desire, blah, blah, blah. And it was more about leadership, even though there were church services and people were professing Christians, and I'm not doubting that they weren't. It was the model that we were following, which was leadership, number one. And then I would share this and they would say, well, I would really rather focus on Christ. I said, oh, well, there's an opportunity to share Christ because there's church services and as part of a church community. But I was very misguided because my focus on Christ shifted to the focus on the business. And Christ became secondary in my heart and in my attention and affections. It was idolizing and worshiping this entire business model as the be-all, end-all. And Jesus and Christ were just sort of invited along. It wasn't, and I don't misunderstand. I believe people were believers and worshiped the Lord. For me, that is where my focus became, because I am a recovering people pleaser and I work hard and I want to be in favor with the people I'm working to work with or impress or what have you. And so I was driven to continue to get those accolades, and that's what was motivating me. And if I came up against something, well, I'm not sure if, we should, and I can't think of a specific example, but if there was a check in my spirit, it was explained away. And I had not always the self-confidence to explore it on my own. I just believed what I was being told and believed it was on, the right way to be thinking or behaving or the path to follow.
This sounds so incredibly confusing as someone who would be trying to figure out, as someone who would be a congregant. So as a congregant, this sounds so incredibly confusing well, if the senior pastor is not in my upline, then again, we're going to have some moments where we're not all on the same page. And who am I referring to? Yeah, you're nodding. It looks like this was, how did this affect you on a spiritual level as well? You're talking about Jesus started to come second. Like, how did that wear on you?
Oh, it was, so I did have access to the pastor. I could go and talk to him, and I did on occasion. We had marriage counseling. We had things that we did. There was access to him. It was the community that was not holistic. It wasn't organic. It was very much defined by the influence of the structure of the business. And so it was on the one hand, and there's, no matter what it is, there's always a mixture of truth. So there's always things that are true going on and being said. And then it's just those nuances of, wait a minute, this doesn't jive, that we don't maybe take the time to flesh out. So for me, what was impactful was the teaching. The teaching of the business and the church was very much the patriarchal model, and women were very much needing to be subservient and submit. And even though I was a female business leader and working hard and having a small measure of growth, and that was okay, it was confusing to then be in a marriage relationship and have it. I couldn't use those gifts and talents in that situation to solve problems or to address issues. I had to set all that aside, and follow what was being led, even though it wasn't leadership, it was abdication in many cases. So for me, it was confusing to be a woman and trying to build a business pretty much on my own, because my husband wasn't really that interested in it. But yet I had to squash all those gifts and talents I was using to build it when I was at home or at church. But I was encouraged to use them when I was in the business space. But in every other space, I was not allowed to be who I was.
Right. So there was this there's all these separations happening. There's separations in who you go to for what. There's separations in who you can talk to within your church community. There's all these different layers of separations happening. It's a lot of like compartmentalizing
Yes.
of people.
And people
and
thoughts and behaviors. And
right. And when I think about two different aspects of a church, discipleship would have been primarily, it sounds like, your upline.
Yes.
But you had access to the pastor depending on what was needed.
Yes.
Like marriage counseling, for example. Okay. And then like a missional aspect of going out and sharing with others. Again, having been in an MLM at one point, I know the sense of pressure I felt to always be sharing the business. And for that to get mixed up with sharing the gospel. And so I know you already spoke to feeling like, okay, I have to share the business first. And then the gospel is maybe the clincher to the conversation of them coming. And so was there a mix between asking them to join the business and to join the church? Or was it more so an ask for joining the business?
For me, it was joining the business and then exposing them to the faith through it. And it wasn't ever anything I'd probably vocalized very often to my own discredit. So I made it about the business, and I remained a believer myself, but I wasn't growing in my faith. I was growing in my leadership skills. I was growing in my ability to address naysayers to what I was doing. And I had a lot of people concerned about me. I became very isolated from the people that know and loved me and helped me get through a divorce. And now I'm remarried and I'm in this business and I'm not engaging with people because they're not coming alongside this thing. And I have to say that when I was very vulnerable when my friends approached me about this. I was going through a divorce. I was married for 17 years and I had 2.5 years of a degree. I was a mom. I was a stay-at-home mom, very involved in my community, but I didn't have a recent work history. I was scared. I was vulnerable. I was grieving the loss of a marriage. We were very involved in our community. I was losing my community because, it's hard to coexist when you're both involved. I just decided to take a back seat to being involved in the school and everything. So I thought I found a new community, a family that I could grow in and provide for my family and not have to face my fears of going back to school and getting a job.
And it should have been a community like a family. That is what the church is. A church is supposed to be that. And so for you to have a desire and to think, okay, great, like I've found something that I've been looking for. And gosh, I know that feeling of like, just feeling like it's a blessing. Like,
felt
wow,
like a provision,
this is such a blessing. It's a gift. Yeah, absolutely. And that's where it can lead into spiritual abuse, is because people are exploiting, not necessarily, and this is where it does get kind of dicey, because not everyone's doing this on purpose.
Absolutely not.
We can take advantage of someone and not realize that that's what we were doing. And then we can realize that we can absolutely apologize for it later and seek reparation and amend that amending that relationship.
I completely agree, Naomi. I really sincerely believe that people go in. I sincerely believed in what this was, and I sincerely wanted to help people. The people that got me involved believed in it, and the people that started it believed. The man that started it believed in it. The pastor, they got together thinking, I'm sure that they could help people and help people spiritually, help people financially. It's a beautiful desire to experience that growth yourself and increase in income and help other people. I think what happens is I'm reading this book called the Atlas Factor, and it's talking about how churches tend to model their structure by corporations and how it's all designed to rest on the shoulders of one person, like the Atlas, the Greek model, the Greek figure. And then if you turn it upside down, it's just everything's resting on one person. And that isn't sustainable for one person to be the guy, the charisma. And so that's what these two organizations were structured as. There was a very well pastor that, preached well, was an orator, kind, loving man, beautiful family. And then the same thing of the business leader, same kind of a person. but it was all about them. That was the problem. And they didn't mean for it to be, but I think that you get off, I assume they did it. I don't believe that they did. But then when it's all about you, it's easy to get off track and things start getting bigger and expanding and growing. Our hearts are deceitful, and it's easy to get off track and have it be about the leadership and about this and about them, as opposed to being about Christ and the kind of loving others the way as they need to be loved. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a difficult combination to do well. I don't know that it could be, because of the expectations of what it requires to grow a business. I've grown one. I helped grow a company starting in 2016, and like just everything that went into that. And it's very much like a dual focus. It's like, yes, I can grow an organization, and it is possible to grow an organization with Christian values.
Mm-hmm.
To be doing it to be growing a business where I need to recruit people into my specific upline, my specific versus this person or that person's within the congregation. And I'm not supposed to be talking in the same depth anyway with people who are in that part of the congregation. Just the divisions that we start to have, and these sort of allegiances, I think I would say, like these sort of loyalties, it really divides up the sense of family. And again, when it comes to then bringing in others, and then it's like, okay, well, now we talk to these and we don't talk as much to those. And I'm sure people who are watching this are like, yeah, like we can see where that gets really tricky, and it gets really messy, and it doesn't match what we see in scripture. It doesn't match what the community is supposed to look like. And I can completely understand how someone would get involved in it. And I mean, I have to, because I've gotten involved in an MLM before. And again, I'm not saying that all MLM experiences are bad. For me, it landed me in a place of just feeling a lot of pressure. Like every conversation I had with friends, family, new people I met, like yes. I needed to share about this to grow the business. And so it was that pressure, and it took away from the sense of authenticity I had in my conversations with people.
I became a different person.
And there was also, I also, did you have this too? I also just had this perception that others perceived me, even when I did just want to like hang out for their birthday, that they would perceive it as I had an ulterior motive.
Because I did. Every person I met was a potential new person in my business, and I could never just be there and be authentic and just have it be relaxing. It was always, and I had a friend a very close friend that eventually said, she got mad. Would you stop talking to me about this? I don't want to hear about it anymore. And I lost friends. I pulled myself away, and I isolated myself against people that loved me. And I'm even now, as I prepared for this conversation, began re-grieving some of those relationships, and met a friend and I apologized again to her and told her that I was so sorry. So there was a loss of friendships, a loss of community, and a sense of, I have to perform and be the model that they've laid out for me to be. And it made me doubt myself. I was a mom. I emotionally connected to my children. I began to doubt my parenting. I began to be told that had been done that wrong, and change who I was. They were young school-age children. And I really feel that time of 10 years really was damaging to my relationship with them. And to this day, I think there's still some scars of that, and they've forgiven me, and we're all still close, but it was a painful time. They were judged, and they were told they weren't good enough. And I felt that way about myself. And it was very legalistic in a sense, and legalistic in the sense that man-made ideas become law for others, right? That's my definition of legalism. So that's what we were trying to fit into. I was told I just needed to have a sweet spirit and not try to be leading, when I was actually leading a business, but I couldn't lead in my personal home life. It didn't make sense. I was so confused. And it was just really, really damaging to have all this confusion going on.
And when I think back to how I felt when I was looking in the rearview mirror, like what you're talking about, and I still feel some of it now when I think about it, I felt a sense of shame.
Heavy shame. Heavy shame. Mm-hmm. I sometimes don't know if it would be beneficial, but there's other people I wonder if it would be helpful to apologize to, even though at the time I fully believed what I was saying. I don't anymore, and I may still have some more of those conversations just to, because you spend a lot of time. It was expensive. There were seminars, there were meetings, there were CDs, there was travel, there was stuff to buy, and I never earned any money from this and worked very, very hard, but and I invited others and they did the same. I know we all. So, but Naomi, the thing is I feel like at this stage of things, the Lord, what God will do whatever it takes to bring you to where He needs you to be or wants you to be, to draw us closer to Himself, to develop in us what He desires for us to be and who to be and what and how to behave. And so I look back on this, and while I made a decision, I joined it, I stayed in it. I didn't follow the questions and pursued my questions or but God has used it in my life, and there's so much redemption that's come even out of it. I'm so very grateful for the Lord getting my attention when I came out of this to just really bring me closer to Him, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to look back and see the complexity of it for everyone. So I'm like, this is not simple. It's not simple to look back and see, okay, I made these choices, but I was like primed and ready in the perfect spot because I was suffering and I was hurting. And this is what I'm hearing from you is you were suffering, and people who were genuinely thought it was going to be a good thing for you. They weren't trying to take advantage or lead you in a direction that was going to cause pain and shame and loss of relationship and confusion. And so it's just the messes that we can all wind up in, well-intentioned. And yes, to look back and to be able to see how the Lord has worked through it, and that His forgiveness is real, and that we do get to apologize to people, and perfectly they forgive us as they're called to. When we genuinely apologize, there should be genuine forgiveness. And so to be able to look back, and see, okay, this hasn't been wasted. I always say I'd rather not do it again. Like I don't want to go back and do it again, but God has done good things with it. And for that, I'm grateful. And so, Tami, would you mind sharing how you actually ended up leaving? Because there's the MLM and there's the church, and they're so interwoven. So did you lose and leave everything? What did that look like?
So, great question. So at one point, the leader of the multi-level marketing business and the leader of the church had a falling out. And my husband was very close to the pastor, and we sided in our hearts with the side of the pastor and left the MLM. I was the one who was building it, so I then had to communicate to the people. Now, mind you, who loved me, had me in their home. I helped with their children. They employed me for a while when I needed help. They were emotionally involved with me and saw me through a really hard time. And there were things that went on there. There was stuff that was happening, but we were close, and so. I abandoned them, and it was hard for me to then leave the business and not be able to say why, because I was told not to communicate why. So I just left them. And then because of that, and then there was one of the leaders above them that was very gracious, but it was the ones that felt abandoned that I spent the most time with and was the closest to. It was very, very hard. And then there was even a meeting with the pastor to try to restore that relationship, but it was severed. Once you leave, you're cut off from those relationships. And so, but that was why we got out of the business. And then later, then in our relationship, right, it was always, our difficulties were blamed on the business being a part of our lives. But then when that was out, then it became me. I became somehow the problem of the struggles we were having. And eventually I left the church because one of the pastors was convinced I was having an affair, and I wasn't. And I lost my voice. I wasn't being heard anymore. So I left the church on my own.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What a horrible accusation.
Yeah, it was. So after we left that business, I was encouraged by my husband to join another business because, we were struggling financially, and I was very good at that building. And I was part of another MLM that was much, much more wholesome. It wasn't associated with the church. I actually was earning money, but I became close to the leaders because they're edifying you. They're feeding a need for me to be recognized. And I maybe got a little bit too emotionally close and could have corrected that very easily if that had been addressed, but it turned into I was being accused that I was, having a full-blown affair, and then I was the enemy, and there was no way for me to be heard anymore. And so I left as a result of those difficulties, and then the marriage eventually ended, and based on all of that. So it was all very painful to lose a community and then have to leave a church that you're being accused of something you didn't do.
Oh my goodness. Do you think there was any connection between you having left the MLM and those accusations being made? Was it just like a deterioration of the trust in the relationship?
It wasn't on the side of the church. It was the deterioration of the relationship. And then the person that was closest to it, who wasn't a part of it, there was a pastor the lead pastor was a part of the business. There was an associate pastor that wasn't. And he was the one that we were closest to in terms of marriage counseling and things like that. And he was the one that convinced my husband because I eventually filed for separation. He convinced my husband to just file for divorce. And so it was really separate from the business, but it was the culture that was in the same, that mindset of preserving the marriage over individuals in the marriage. And that was the goal. And it didn't matter how they were struggling or needed help or care or nurturing. It was just that the marriage is the point, not the people in it. And so I was struggling, trying to say what was my perception of what was going wrong and what we needed to have to be addressed. And at that point, I knew the moment I lost my voice and couldn't stay.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a feeling that we don't forget, that feeling of losing our voice.
Right. I knew the moment it happened. And, my husband at that point moved away. He was working out of state. He had found a job out of state. And that the pastor would call me and say, the church was 45 minutes away. I didn't have money for gas. And they would say, well, we'll give you gas money. And I said, that doesn't make sense. If I'm tithing $5 and you're giving it to me for gas, it doesn't make sense. And then he called after I resigned my membership and wanted to talk to me. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't engage in conversation. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel safe. And again, these are kind people. I think he really was concerned about me, but I wasn't going to convince him of anything. I wasn't going to change his mind about anything. They had already decided I had done what I had done. And I didn't feel comfortable to go back into those conversations. I just needed to be gone. It's hard because I just don't align myself with some of those values and some of those theologies. And so that's it was too much for me to take on at the time. And, it's not uncommon for me to meet people who share about how they were repeatedly being asked to go back into environments where they knew they weren't being heard. They knew they weren't being believed. There was some form of abuse. There was overexertion of control. Even if the tone is kind, what's being said to them is untrue. It's unkind, sometimes very ugly, like the accusations you were receiving. And I am relieved when I hear that people did not continue to go. Because if we have to walk into an environment for some reason, and this would be like, on a case-by-case basis, if someone needed to go back into an environment like that for some reason, then we don't want to go alone. That's like always my number one first. Does it have to happen?
And if it does have to happen, which is not always the case, then how do we do it in a way that's safer? How do we find maybe a public neutral environment where we're not actually meeting at the organization? Who do we have come with us for support of all kinds to help ensure our safety of all kinds? How do we do this again in a way that is going to make sure that we have as much protection as possible heading into it? And so I'm glad to hear that as difficult as that would have been and as grieved as you must have been, that you did not continue to put yourself in that situation with such ugly things being said where you knew they're not going to hear me. They're not going to believe me. And so I'm just it's like cruel and unusual punishment to have to be put in that situation over and over again.
Yeah, the pastor that I called him and I said, I hear you feel like I've lied to you, and I haven't lied to you. And I would like to talk about it. And the conversation was cut short, and he was not going to really engage with me anymore. That was the associate pastor. So I knew that I was done. I couldn't continue to put my heart out there. And looking back, I probably could have talked to the senior pastor. He and I never talked about this, but I just had it. I couldn't. It was the environment and the culture. So.
And what was the time frame between leaving the MLM associated with the church and then this happening with the church? I guess I'm struggling not to see any sort of connection there with you having left the MLM.
So, the leaders that I worked with stopped talking to me. I'd be in the building and they would walk by me and not talk to me. They were very hurt, and it was very dysfunctional, and it was just very unhealthy. But nobody addressed it. It was normal behavior. I grew up my dad would always say, you just got to understand the other person. So I grew up understanding people and empathizing, but I never realized at some point it has to be about me at some level. I have to be heard. I have to have a voice. So that was the same kind of context. Well, we just have to let that be. So I feel like, I feel like if there was a connection, because the senior pastor sat us all down and tried to reconcile Scott and my ex-husband and I with this couple who I had worked with so closely, but they weren't having anything of it. They didn't respect him. They were very hurt by me. I just feel like this part had more to do with our relationship and the beliefs of the church of not ministering to the people in a marriage. Just you have to stay married no matter what. But if there was a connection, I haven't even thought that through or made one. I feel like it was separate, and I think it was maybe a year and a half later. It wasn't very much longer.
Okay. And after leaving all of this and being, I think, did you tell me it's been about 10 years?
10 years.
Do I have that right?
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Is there any relationship with anyone who was connected to the MLM and the church now? I know you said there's people you've apologized to, but I didn't know if they were a part of the church or not. No one. I don't really connect with anyone who's part of the church anymore. Part of the business, yes, but not part of the church. There has been, I think, a pretty significant turnover there. And in fact, the betrayal I experienced, my ex-husband also experienced from them later. He continued to go there, and they betrayed him at some point, he told me. And he's now they're to blame for this destruction of our lives and not me. So that's been some great form of grace towards me along the way. And I don't know exactly what happened there, but there was a falling out. And then he saw, to some extent, to the extent he has capacity to feel and see, he did see a glimpse of what I experienced. So there's some mercy there. But I do have one friend in particular who's still close to the leaders of the original organization. So. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Gosh. In what ways does this continue to impact you today?
So I will say that there's just times, like in my job right now, which has just been an amazing provision for me, so much common grace, so much healing of shame, and all of these things I've experienced at my current work. It's been incredible how the Lord has used that to heal me. But I'm being asked now to do things I don't know how to do and grow and expand. And that fear comes up that I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm not going to be able to measure up. They're not going to like me if I can't figure out how to do this, which is all not true. They continue to want to grow and become better at things or learn things to add value to the organization. But that fear will come up and those anxiety things come up. And that's just still rooted in my childhood, of course, but then also in how that experience of having to perform to be valued. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that does get wired into our brains, especially when it's starting in childhood, but it can happen even older on. And yes, thankful for neuroplasticity where it can change, but it takes time, it takes diligence, and it also takes experiences that are different to continue to show us, okay, it can go differently. This isn't necessarily the same. It could be, so I'm going to pay attention, but it also might not be. And so am I going to proceed at all? Do I have enough evidence that it could be different? And if so, I'm going to proceed with caution as I gather more information about this relationship. And speaking of relationships, how has this history shaped you in the different relationship roles that you have, whether it be a parent or a partner or a friend, a congregant?
Well, I think there's been some damage in my family and some of my kids that lingers to this day. So there's that I try to stay supportive of and encourage through. And there's all of my children have been in therapy one reason or another, and I'm sure have worked through this time in their lives and have come through it. I'm grateful that they all, have a relationship with the Lord and are leaning into Him daily for all of their care and needs and recovery from that time. But it's overall, I just really feel like how this is impacting that is it doesn't. I mean, I'm now more fully who I am, and the ability that I have to empathize and enter into people's pain and cry with people and be joyous. It's just all that I ever wanted to do then. But now it's just more fully, sincerely about that person and not what they can do for me. And the joy of just coming alongside and loving people through their pain and having all of this experience. I guess it does in the sense that I now can just more fully engage with them and really help them where they really need help and not about financial anything. It's just about ministering to people, loving them, coming and meeting them where they're at, and being that voice of love and care and concern, and that they're seen and heard and validated. And I was even able to minister to a friend once who's going through something really hard. And I said, have you asked your kids how it made them feel? And to her, that was an aha moment. But that's something I needed to learn to do. And then she was able to then embrace that and implement that. So just those kinds of things are just what brings so much joy to my life that I'm able to finally do again.
Oh, yeah. And we don't know those kinds of questions or statements until we have experienced it. It's like even being professionally trained for such conversations, if I didn't have the personal lived experience that I have to go hand in hand with the professional side, like I wouldn't know what to ask. And I hear that all the time from people who do come to be emboldened. It's they're like, well, I've had people who have seen up to 5 therapists before they come to us. And they're like, they don't know the direction to go because they don't know the experience to know what to ask and where to head. And it's just true. It's true. Excellent support professionals. It's just, there's a difference. And I hear you speaking to that. And it is, I think, a grace in our lives when we have suffered to be able to come alongside others who have suffered similarly, or there can still be pretty decent differences, and we're still going to have an idea of what it's like to grieve and how long it really takes and what people really need, and that companionship. And it is so incredibly beautiful that you are offering that to others and getting to be the friend that you've always really been, but the freedom to really be it and to come alongside others in that way. So I'm also wondering how this has impacted your faith, particularly with the connection with the church.
Yeah. So I never have doubted the Lord's love for me or what he's done for me. And my faith has remained intact, but what it has done, when my second husband left, I remembered that moment. I was like, okay, Lord, I'm clearly getting ahead of you. I think I'm following you, but I'm really following my own thoughts and fears, and they're guiding me. And I want to do this your way. I need you to take care of me, and I need you to show me what to do next. And from that's been 11 years now. And my daughter was 7 and now she's 18. And we look back and we rejoice over all the Lord has done for us, how he's provided for us. I went back to school. He provided a way for me to do that. My dad said, you need to finish school. I'll pay for it. Take out the loans. And he did. I graduated the year after my son. I wore his cap and gown. We went to the same school. And I have a beautiful job that just believes in me and has seen in me what I don't see in myself. And his provision for me has just been so rich. And I've never wanted for anything. I haven't dated. I just wanted to be in the Lord's umbrella and no one else's. And I wanted him to show me the way to live my life and not anyone else tell me what to do. And it's just been the most beautiful, grounding 10 years of my life. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I'm so grateful for his provision and his love and care for me. And now, a few churches later, I'm finally in a church where now the last year where there's even been more healing because there isn't this patriarchal thing. It's just people are people, and elders will talk to me. I don't even know who they're married to. It's led with heart and relationship instead of theology and knowledge. And the theology and knowledge is there, and I'm learning right alongside, but intellect is not the leading. I think you can come into theology. There's just a sense of arrogance, and I've arrived. And then love becomes not. It's like the business became more important to me, and Christ became secondary. I think sometimes intellect and theology and knowledge become the worship thing to worship, and then loving others becomes secondary. And that's a bit of disconnect in so many churches, but in this particular church, they put it's relationships and conversation are what they value, and you see it in their service, and I experience it with the people. So my relationship with God has been very much strengthened and deepened, and since being out of all of that in the last 11 years, and it's been a beautiful, beautiful time. I'm very grateful.
And I hear what you're saying, Lord. Yes, the intellect and just that knowledge without the heart posture to go along with it falls really flat, and it can be incredibly damaging. It can be very discouraging. It can be very hurtful, and that is what actually can really cause disunity as well, is just, no, I think I know everything. And that's not to diminish education.
No,
and it's not to diminish important. Theology and good doctrine. Mm-hmm. It's not. Mm-hmm. We do need to know our Bibles. We
Absolutely.
need to know what we believe and why we believe it. And we need to love in our approach, and we need to know what's primary and what's not, and allow that to lead. Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. It can get really ugly out there. And I've absolutely seen that in mainstream churches, and it's very disappointing, and definitely an area for growth for many of us. And when we find an environment where the theology is still strong, and we are still learning and being equipped, and it's solid, that does matter. That's a whole different kind of issue. We can have character issues, or we can have theological issues. We don't want either in our church leadership as much as possible. And so when we're looking at one or the other, it's like, no, we really have to have both.
We do.
And if we don't have the strength of character to go along with the strength of our theology and our doctrine, we're going to have issues.
Absolutely.
We're still going to have issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah. As a final question, I'm wondering, I love asking everyone this because I think, one, it's just a good takeaway for people who tune in. And also, I think it just really speaks to what we've learned ourselves and like what we really value. If you were to issue your loved ones, so your children, a warning in hopes of them never finding themselves in a similar situation, what red flag would you want them to be aware of?
I would say trust your gut. If there's a red flag inside of you, flush it out, ask the questions, align what you're being taught with scripture. And if there feels like there's something missing, don't ignore it. Try to figure it out. Ask questions. Don't allow yourself to be silenced if at all possible. And if I could, I'd like to read something. Thanks. So this is I have a devotional Bible, and this is called The God of Whatever It Takes, which I said earlier. And it's going through Saul's redemptive story of who had persecuted Christ and then was saved. And at the summary, and it talks about that's how God is with us. He'll do whatever it takes, like he did with Saul, to bring us alongside. And so it says, the summary is, the last paragraph is, whatever road we are on today, the right road, the wrong road, the road we never intended to take, or the one where we determined to go our own way, may we understand that the God who created us and loves us will do whatever it takes to reach us, bring about change, and use our redemption story to lead others to come to know him. Sometimes it will be bold and loud. Sometimes it will come in a small nudge or heart whisper. May we always respond with gratitude and passion, for our lives deeply matter to him. So I would say I love that because it sums up the whole process and the whole relationship with God and the whole redemption story. And I would say, look for redemption in everything. Look for the story that he's weaving in your lives and the lives of others, and find the joy in the moments where that aligns. And it's just beautiful and it's happening. And just take the time to look for it and see it. And if you're in an environment where that's not welcome, it's probably time to try to make some change and find someone to help you be strong enough to do that.